Hey everyone, it's Tiger with one more line of code. We're going to get started with Riome today. Uh, Step one, we are starting from scratch, so legit scratch. I have a fresh install of Windows 11. I just installed Chrome, Firefox, and let me just switch to it and kind of give you a shot here. But the only things I've really done here, Chrome, Firefox, I have this little like cursor highlight thing. I think that might help, a little bit later when I'm trying to point stuff out. And then of course I'm, my recording software at the bottom. Recording software is running on the other monitor, so if you see me staring at that, it's usually to try to make sure I didn't cut anything off and that I'm, you can see everything that you need to see. As noted a few other times before, I want to try not to cut a whole heck of a lot. We want to try to run straight through this, and you'll, and learn from it. At the times where I need to put in a password or log into something, I will have to do cuts there. But other than that, we're pretty much going to fire straight through. The only other thing I can think of off the top of my head right now where I may pause would be if there really is going to be a long delay on some of these installs. Or I guess the only one install we got today I know is a pretty long one. Or if I need to kind of adjust the video recording to make sure we can get a zoomed in version enough that you can see. So with that, let's go ahead and just get started. So my IDE of choice is called Rider. If you want to use, actually right there, if you want to use Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code or any other IDE, it really doesn't matter. Anything that'll code in C# will be able to do what we're doing here. And then of course later on, if we get into React and stuff, you'll be able to use some other options as well. But I'll be using Rider all the way through. Rider was made free for non-commercial use a couple months ago. With that said, since we're not selling, you're going to be fine on that. With that said, I do have the paid for version of it, so I get a little bit more, I guess. I don't get any additional options out of it, but I do have a paid for version just in case anyone's aware. I'm not sponsored. Nobody ever sponsors me. That's not what this is all about. I wanted you guys to know I do have a paid for version of it because I've had it for 4 or 5 years now. I've been using it quite a long time. Let's get the download started. Download. Rider does have their own, not their own, but they have an AI plugin that costs a little extra. I do pay a little extra for that, but you won't need it. You can use other AI bots if you want, or you don't even need to use AI at all. We'll show you all kinds of different ways to do all this stuff. None of it really is required. You have a lot of options here. Let me open up this installer. Which is going to take its sweet time, apparently. There it goes. You probably just saw a flash of a big black screen. That's the, what do you call it? The permission, the user account control permission type stuff. This is pretty small. Give me 1 sec. Let me try to get you like a better, yeah, that'll work. Okay, so Rider setup. We'll just next, or go into our default stuff. That's all fine. I'm going to add a shortcut. I am going to create these associations. If you are primarily a Visual Studio user, you don't need these. That'll be kind of up to you. I'm going to leave the rest alone. I don't want to have to do a restart, and none of the rest really bothers me or, makes any difference to me. So we will next. Where it installs is fine, and it's going to go. I guess we'll let it do its thing. Let me back out a little bit here so you can... There you go. Watch it happen. It's going to be fun. This one takes a little bit of a time, so I'm going to speed this along for you. You're welcome. Almost done. Perfect. I'm not going to zoom in on that because it's the typical complete and ask me if I want to run. I'm going to go ahead and say yep. Let's go ahead and agree to all that stuff. Give me a second here while I activate my license. Alrighty. License activated. Ask me what theme. I'm fine with Rider, but if you're color sensitive one way or the other. Key map, I'm going to stay with Visual Studio. I probably will be calling out the keys for you if you need, but if you're more familiar with any others, obviously go for it. This is the AI assistant I was talking to you about, this JetBrains AI assistant. I am going to install that, but like I already mentioned, you won't really need that. If you have it, great. Let's go for it. These new tools that are coming out. They're definitely not taking over my job, but they do come in handy every now and then. I realize this is a little bit small, but once this is such a small portion of this, all I need to do here is hit new solution. I know that's a little tiny, but basically it's hit new solution. Give me one sec. Let me actually give you a zoomed in version of this. This is a little more than I remembered. One sec. You can see what's going on now here. So in here, I got a couple things going on. I can see already, this is one of the reasons why I wanted to install this from scratch. These are the things that if you already had these things installed, they wouldn't become problems, like this SDK version. So I'm going to go to web, because on web, without any other .NET frameworks or anything installed, I got a lot of grayed out stuff, which is not what I want. You can see everything here is grayed out. I can't click anything in here. It looks like my highlighter thing doesn't work, but the mouse pops up pretty well, doesn't it? Yeah. What we're going to be doing for Rider, I want a .NET 9 project. And you'll see I don't have it installed, so I got to hit the install button. And that goes pretty quick. Rider does an okay job giving me some little one-button options, but as you'll see shortly, it's not always perfect at it. It looks like it installed well this time, so I think we'll be all right. You see all these just kind of like came lit up now because it installed .NET 9. So solution name is Riome. And our project is actually going to be, we're going to make a few projects today, but our very first one is called Web API, because we're going to scaffold all of our projects. We're not really going to be doing much coding today. We're just going to scaffold them all and set up dependencies. Let me switch this to the folder that I want, which is there. And I'm going to mark create a Git repository on this. I'll be storing these in Git, and as I mentioned previously, I won't be making the Git public right away. I'm going to keep building this thing all along privately. You can obviously follow code and rewrite everything that you'd like, so you would have a copy of it. But once the project is done, I will open up the repository to be public, and everybody can have access at that time. So Riome, Web API, folder, Git repository, C#. I'm making a Web API is the first one. And then down here, the only other thing we really need to look at is the authentication. I'm going to leave this on no authentication. We will be using authentication, but I'm going to kind of cherry pick the pieces that I need. If I choose any of these, it comes with a lot of extra stuff that I don't need, I don't want. We're not crazily rolling our own authentication. We're not doing anything wild. I just don't need all of their stuff. So we're going to kind of cherry pick what we need out of it. And I'm not going to be setting up Docker. I think down from here, I don't even know what these are. If you want to hit any of this kind of stuff, I guess go for it, but I'm not going to be doing any of it. So let's hit create. And get you back to here. All right. So let me do a couple things here. First, I want to make this bigger for you guys. I want to move my head out of the way. And then let me go to settings. Rider has a neat feature where I can just zoom the entire UI up to 150, 175. Let's stay here for right now. This really doesn't give me a lot of room here, but let's stay with it. If I need to go back down to 150, I will. But this, I'm hoping this is legible to everybody now. So right at the bottom here, we already got a couple errors here, and they're a little bit funky. I'm going to hit this one more suggested to kind of see all of the errors. And we've got a couple things. So the very first one is the Defender may affect, or Microsoft Defender may affect the IDE. It wants me to mark Writer and the project folder as excluded folders for Microsoft Defender, which generally is a pretty good idea. So I'm going to do that. You'll see at the bottom it's going to do that. I'm going to get elevated permission ask thing. And then the little pop that, yep, that was done. Now, the rest of these three, these are all actually the same error. So invalid VCS root mapping. VCS is version control system, version control solution, something like that. Basically what it's telling me, you can read it of course, but the directory is registered as a Git root, but no Git repositories were found. No Git repositories were found there because you see this bottom one, Git is not installed. Again, this is a clean install. I don't have Git installed, but it gives me the option here to download and install it, so I'm going to do that. You can see down here at the bottom, I get another privilege thing. Permissions, account control, user account control, whatever you call it. Git has been installed. With Git installed now, this project wasn't created properly because Git wasn't installed. So I have a couple options. I can go and fix this by going to the folder and adding the appropriate stuff. I think you can just right click or do some command line things. I don't know those very well. You won't see me doing a whole lot of command line stuff, a little bit, but very little. Because this is a brand new project, I'm actually going to kind of cheat a little bit here. I'm closing and just saying, don't ever ask me when I'm closing again. I'm actually just going to go to this project and delete it, and we're going to go through and recreate it again. So we'll do it a bit faster this time. And actually, while I have this open, let me remember to pin the project down here. Let's pin. And I can remove this one because this is the one we deleted. And now I'm just going to hit new solution again. And if you remember from before, it's all the same stuff. Riome, web API, make sure we're on web over here, create Git, .NET 9, web API, no authentication, create. Maximize. Now, we do still have the 1 down there at the bottom, right, for Defender, which of course makes sense. We will hit exclude folders again. I'll probably get a user account control pop. Yep. And that's that. I can get rid of these now. I can close that one. And we're looking better. Let me throw my head back over there now. I know I'm going to forget because that's kind of where little notifications pop up, but hopefully if anything pops up back there, you'll holler at me. All right, we've got a project. I'm going to do a couple things because all I want to do today, remember, is get this IDE installed, which we're done. So step 1 is great. Step 2 is I want to get the project scaffolded. So in order to do that, I need to kind of talk about what we're going to be doing a little bit deeper. And I think to do that, let me just draw this. If I do something like a is it Miro? There's some project, I think it's Miro, this looks right. It's like Miro, like workflow or diagram maker, some thing. Allow. I don't want to sign up. I don't want to log in. I just want to make a document. I just want to make like a workflow. Why is this so hard? I need some kind of like this thing? No. I don't need a whole workflow. Flowchart? I kind of want a flowchart, but I don't need a template. I just want to make one. Hmm. There we go. That took way too long. Should probably save that, huh? So Miro flowchart online. So this lets me make a flowchart. That's perfect. Let me see if I can draw what we're gonna do here. Is that readable? Readable? So we've got this web API project. So if anybody's familiar with clean architecture and or domain-driven design, you may understand some of this. We're sort of going to follow clean architecture. We are sort of going to follow domain-driven design, but we are not strictly adhering to either one of them. We're all about balance here. So we're not necessarily going to be adhering strictly to certain rules and regulations. We're going to bend some rules. We're going to break some other ones. If I know I'm bending them or breaking them, I'll let you know. But the general thought is I've been doing this for quite enough time that I think I know where we can kind of, shift around. The problem is that your timelines at your work with your clients and your bosses and stuff don't always relate to how much time you have to build things properly. Anybody who's worked in any bit of any major company or corporation, you're definitely going to find spaghetti code all over the place, multiple developers writing things, duct tape fixes here. It happens all over the place. We want to keep it clean, but within reason. I don't want to spend 2 days writing something just to have my responses come back 10 milliseconds faster, if that makes sense. I don't need to be doing code to handle 10 million user requests per second if I'm only expecting 100 user requests per second or 1,000 user requests per second. So we will be following clean architecture a bit. We will be following domain-driven design a bit. We will be following vertical slicing a bit, but we won't be adhering to them strictly. You'll need to make the best decisions for what your project is and what your plans are, who's going to be using it, what kind of a timeline you have, and you need to balance all of that appropriately. I will try to make notes where I know I'm cutting a corner or where I may be not cutting a corner, where I'm specifically doing it this way in order to gain the performance boost that I'm looking for. So the web API project is what we have right now. This is our presentation layer. Normally you see this like circle diagram thing. There's probably I know I can find this thing in like seconds here. It's like the circle picture. Yeah, something like these, right? This presentation layer, this is where our web API is, and then there's persistence infrastructure, this whole thing, right? We're going to be doing that, but let me draw it out differently because I've never been a big fan of the circle. And can I just make more? Do I really gotta click them every time? Persistence. Infrastructure. Basically, I'm going to draw these out really quick, then we'll talk about what each section is for, what we're going to be doing with it, and then we'll actually go and make these things. Domain. And finally, this one's a little non-standard. I'm going to be making a contract. This looks so small compared to the others. Contract could theoretically be called contracts pluralized, and I really want it to be, but the rest of them are singular. So I get stuck in like a catch-22 brain problem here where I feel like this should also be singular, but it almost should be plural. We're going to leave it singular. Just know that I have struggled with that in my brain. Clean architecture. The way that we're going to be coding this thing, so all of our entry point is through our presentation layer, which is our web API layer. Everything inbound hitting our API is going to be hitting web API. So all of our endpoints are going to be set up there. Endpoints don't do any work, really. They just kind of take in the request and send it down to application for application to actually do the work. Okay, so web API is really just it's kind of what anybody from looking at your Swagger docs or your documentation would see. This is the outer exposed layer of your project. So this is where this is what everyone outside of the company will see. So there's no work involved in it. There's no business really rules going on in there. We'll bend that rule a little bit, but in general, web API is set to just kind of be an exposing layer. Web API is going to make calls to application layer. Application is going to be where we house what we call a bunch of handlers. Handlers, the way that my head thinks about them, is kind of like a business manager or like a job scheduler, a task manager of some sorts. Application will do some work for us. It will do some of the coding, some of the math, some of the, adjustments that we need. But in general, the application is actually going to be using interfaces to fire infrastructure methods and or persistence methods. Basically, it's going to say, give me all the data I need from here, from an infrastructure, or it's going to say, give me all the data from within persistence to get all of its data. And then it's going to group, combine, do whatever it needs to with that data, and then give it back up to web API. When it gives the data back up to web API, it's going to give it in the form of a contract. The contracts are exposed. So from application, it's really everything coming in. We got web API is going to hit application, which is going to kind of do some infrastructure and or persistence work, generate a contract, and give it back. And that's how the whole thing works. So domain is actually where our database models are going to sit and some internal models that we're going to be using that will never be exposed. There is debate about exposing your domain models and table models to outside the world. I'm in the club where I don't like that. I would, even if it's a one-to-one model, DTO contract kind of scenario, I'd still prefer making a second contract and passing that out as opposed to exposing the model itself. It might be a little bit of an older school thought, but that's just the way I like to kind of keep things. So persistence with its tables are really going to be their domain model tables, and then everything will get converted into contracts. All incoming stuff from web API will also be contracts. So you can think of these almost as like a request contract and a response contract. And we'll go from there. Now, as far as dependencies in the project, which is what we're going to do, let's go ahead and set these all up, and then we'll come back to this and we'll draw out these dependencies. I don't want to get anyone super confused yet. So let's get back to here. So in Riome, I can right click on Riome itself, and I'm going to add some folders. So I'm just going to add new solution folders. Let me do that again here. Add new solution folder. Not a new project yet. I just want to add some folders. I'm going to add 2 folders here. One of them called docs and one of them called SRC for source. You've probably seen this a bazillion million times. In source, docs, of course, is all our markdown files, any documentation that we're going to need. Source is going to be our actual code. In here, I'm going to make 2 more folders. One called core and one called presentation. Why am I capitalizing core and why am I capitalizing presentation? I don't know. I just like having them capitalized where the other ones I don't. I think I feel like in source I'm getting more C#y, which tends to be capitalized classes, where above it I'm kind of more more non-C#, which tends to be kind of lowercase type deals. There's some weird break there. Obviously, if you want to lowercase them, lowercase them. If you want to cap them all, cap them all. Do whatever the heck works for you. But this is how my head works. I'm going to take Web API and put it into presentation. As you remember, we call it the presentation layer. That's where it's going to go. So if we just pull this back up. So I've got Web API, which is our presentation layer. Everything else underneath here is going to be part of our core. So we will make each of these as a project. So let's go ahead and do that. So in core, I'm going to add a new project. And sorry, I didn't switch. So in core, I'm going to add, right click, add, new project. And instead of web over here now, I'm going to make these class libraries. So the project directory stays the same. The only thing I really need to do is just set the project name. Of course, I'm still in C#, everything .NET 9, nothing else changes. So all of these projects will be class libraries, so they'll be pretty quick here. Expand. So that's persistence. Let's make infrastructure. Go ahead and make application. And domain. And we can make contract. Lovely. Every one of these projects comes with an empty class 1. We don't need it, so we can go ahead and drop that bad boy. And while I'm at it, in Web API, there's this web API.http. It's a new method for actually hitting endpoints and all that stuff. It seems kind of neat. I'm not going to use it because we're going to be downloading Postman later on, and we'll be using that instead. I think that just gives us some stronger features in the long run. So we'll get rid of that. So that's it. We've got our projects. The only thing left I want to do is I want to set up our dependencies. Dependencies is one of those weird things that I think a lot of people do different. Under clean architecture, a web API is never allowed to directly access persistence or infrastructure. It actually should never access them. It should only ever access application. Application should only access domain. Everything should only go down. So what's weird about this is from Web API, I'm actually going to make a dependency on persistence, and I'm going to make a dependency on infrastructure. But I will never use them. I need the dependencies in order to set up dependency injection. So I have to have, in Web API, my presentation layer, all the dependency injection is going to get set up. All of our services are going to be registered. Because of that, I need access to persistence and infrastructure to call their service, startup files that we'll be making. But we will never actually be doing any work to them directly. But this is why I have to have the dependencies on them, and I'll show you in code probably in the next episode why we needed those. But then from here on out, it's what you would expect. Everything is going to go downhill. Persistence would have a dependency on applications, so would infrastructure, and then from here it's just right down the line. Super simple, okay? So this is the way our dependency flow works. But our use flow is really, web API to application, which grabs a contract and spits it back out. An application is going to be calling interfaces that do work in infrastructure or persistence, because you can't go up. So application can't actually make a call to infrastructure or persistence directly because there's no uphill. So it's going to be making calls to interfaces, which are implemented within infrastructure and persistence. I know I'm probably talking a bunch of nonsense, but as we get moving along here, I think this will become pretty clear as you go. So just kind of remember this deal. This is going to die off in 24 hours, but we can always remake it again if you want. Let's go ahead and get these dependencies set up. So Web API needs persistence and infrastructure. So in Writer, persistence, if we right click on any of these, we right click on dependencies. So I'm going to go in persistence first, and I will reference. And I need a reference to actually, let me start with Web API. So we'll start at the top. So Web API dependencies, we'll right click, we'll go to references. I need a reference to infrastructure and persistence, the two, remember? And I will add, from persistence, I only needed application, and infrastructure only needed application. Okay. So from there, just to pop it up, so we've got web application to persistence and infrastructure, each of these down to application. So from application, we go domain and then down to contract. Application dependencies, we're going to reference domain, and our domain will reference contract. Cool. Fairly simple. Before I actually hit this, just in case anybody's really curious, and I missed all that, didn't I? Crap. Let's jump back to here. Let me... I can't... Oh yeah, I can here. Let me undo that quick. If I remember right, we had done the infrastructure and persistence ones. So in application, right-click dependencies, reference, we're going to reference domain. Okay, and then in domain, we're going to reference contract. But before I do that, I wanted to stop just because as I'm going through this, these are starting to get grayed out. And it's because you're producing, they would produce circular dependencies, or they're referencing themselves. Anybody who's kind of been deving a while, I'm assuming you would know what a circular dependency is, but just in case you don't, it would be a scenario where, like, I'm on domain right now, and I know application uses domain. So if application depends on domain, and domain depends on application, that's what a circular dependency is. The projects would never be able to start because each depends on the other. Domain can't start because it's waiting for application. Application can't start because it's waiting for domain. So domain needs app, which needs domain, which needs app, which needs domain, which needs app. That's a mouthful. Circular dependencies, I'm sure y'all pretty much knew what those were. Just in case you didn't, that's all it is. I'm on domain. I need to set up contract. Hit add. And that's it. We have our project set up. We have our, what do you call this? This is our basic scaffold with our dependencies. That's all I wanted to do today. Pretty simple one. I just wanted to kind of get the base started and the files downloaded. I didn't know how long that was really going to take. So I think right when we get started the next time, we'll start right from here, and we will kind of move on, building this out quite a bit. We'll get some endpoints, we'll start working on handlers, we'll start getting databases set up, we'll do some logging, etc. It'll be pretty fun. So for right now, I'm going to save this, and then behind the scenes, I'll actually go and create the Git repo and actually publish it over to it. I don't want that really as part of kind of the videos. If you need help with Git management, there's plenty of other good videos for that. So I'm just going to kind of do that behind the scenes so it doesn't take up our time on this kind of thing. So with that being said, I guess have a good night. Keep doing what you're doing. Make sure you take some time and learn, right? We'll see you on the next one.